sure I do that. Okay. So we always run our EcoFaith gatherings around our 7 practices for awakening leadership. And if you're not familiar with those, I'm chatting it in the chat box right now because it could be helpful for folks to just bring them up, because I'll be saying, now we're going to be doing practice 1. And so now you have that resource so you can go look at that more thoroughly. So we always begin our gatherings with practice 1, which is, oh, now I've lost my, oh my goodness. Hang in there with me. Okay, which is accessing spiritual power. So we work these practices. I just mentioned them, the 7 practices for awakening leadership, as we move through our meetings and our public actions and within our personal lives as a way to recover from our societal addictions of destruction. So we name those as consumerism, imperialism, colonization, disconnection from the land and one another. So these are practices that we work to reconnect with each other, reconnect to right relationship with the land, to our spiritual practices, to God. So we always begin with a practice 1, which is access spiritual power. Earlier today, I was actually in a meeting with our practicum cohort. We have 4 amazing interns right now. And I was enchanted by Robyn sharing about the new carbon garden in her yard and all of the creature kind within that she is learning about. So I thought that I would read a line actually from our mutual mentoring practice, which I'm also chatting into the chat box, so you can read along with me. It's the personal dimension of mutual mentoring, which says that by recognizing the deeply relational nature of the universe, we acknowledge our need for mentors from the whole community of creation for the sake of our own development as leaders. So thinking about those whole community of creation, which we are called to learn from, I thought I would read one of my favorite biblical passages, which is Job 12, 7 through 10. And we'll just take a moment of silence to think about a teacher from creature kind or plant kind that has mentored you. And if you feel called, you can type it into the chat box. So we just like have a sense of all of the different animal and creature relations that we're bringing into this space as we learn about creating spaces where all sorts of manner of creatures are welcome. So this is Job 12, 7, 10. But ask the beasts, and they will teach you. The birds of the heavens, and they will tell you. Or the bushes of the earth, and they will teach you. And the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among these does not know that the hand of our God has done this? In her hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of every human being. So I'll just take a moment in silence. And if you feel called to type into the chat box one of those beasts that's taught you, the birds, the bushes, the fish, just to take a moment and call those mentors and teachers into the space. And if you don't know how to use the chat box, on the bottom of your screen, there's a little bubble with a dot, 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 and it says chat. And if you click on that, it should pop up to the right. We could also unmute ourselves and name them if you want to do that instead as an alternative. Wonderful. Well, we give thanks. We give thanks for all of the creatures and plants, all of this vast community of God that we learn from along this path as we do this work. And we're so grateful to have you all in this space with us today. And just so we all know who is in the room, this virtual room that we have, let's just go around and share our names, our pronouns, and the land where we are joining the group from. So I can go first as an example of how to do that. I'm Sarah Holst. I'm the practicum coordinator. I use she, her, hers, and they, them, theirs. And I am joining from Anishinaabe land on the shore of Lake Superior, which is Duluth, Minnesota. And you just have to popcorn in. If you overspeak someone, we'll figure it out as we go.
I'm Robyn Hartwig, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joining from Beaverton, Oregon at St. Andrew Lutheran Church. I, for most of my life, have not known who the first peoples were on the land that I've lived on, but I happen to know now that this is Kalapuya land, now part of Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde.
I'm Janet Parker. Can you hear me? I don't have my video working today, but it's great to see many of you and see that others of you are on the call. I live with Robyn, my beloved, and my beloved Crystal, our dog, and our other natural world mentors in West Beaverton. I think also broadly Kalapuya land. And is that all I was supposed to say? She, hers pronouns.
Thanks, Janet.
Thanks.
I can go ahead next. My name is Allison Katsufrakis, and I'm here from Hillsboro, Oregon, which is just a little further west from Beaverton, which is also, broadly speaking, Kalapuya land. I know that there are a couple of other groups that are overlapped over that, but I can't remember the names at the moment. And my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Well, I'm Margaret Armstrong, and I live in Aloha, which is kind of between Beaverton and Hillsboro. Represent Spirit of Grace congregation, and I'm just here to kind of listen and see if this is something that we're going to be able to do at this point. We're kind of in an interim situation. I go by she, her, hers, and yeah, glad to be here.
Great, glad you're here. Welcome.
Thanks for joining us, Margaret.
I'm Pat Christensen. I'm also from St. Andrew Lutheran in Beaverton. And so I don't know if my house is still in the Kalapuya, that one, ownership, but I know that my church is. So there's that. I am one of the co-leaders of our MACG core team. MACG is an community organizing team. And I'm also part of the worship planning team at St. Andrew. So here we go.
I'm Peter Sergienko. I'm a member of St. Michael and All Angels. I use he, him. I'm sitting in basically downtown Portland, and I believe I'm on the land of the Chinook and Multnomah tribes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I use she, hers.
I can jump in. I'm Nathan Holst. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. And I am on pretty much the exact same land as Sarah is, because I'm in a room below her. She is, I love the language of she is my beloved, my partner. And did I miss anything? I don't think so. I think that's it. Thanks. Good to be with you all.
I'm Solveig Nelson Gooden, and I'm here on the east side of the river, and this is the confluence. There were so many tribes that called this place home. So Multnomah, Chinook, Molalla, who are no longer in existence, though most of the other tribes are. And I use she, her pronouns.
Any other folks? I see some.
I was just looking for the coffee cup. It's not. No.
I feel like there's some other folks on that we haven't heard from yet. If that's you, could you speak into the space? Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I recently had come across a quote by Wes Howard Brooke, who names that humans are a lovely expression of inspired earth, topsoil animated by the breath of God. And I keep quoting that at this part of these EcoFaith meetings because I'm so grateful to be gathered with pieces of inspired earth, gathered on land both far away and interconnected. And with that, I will pass it over to our St. Andrews folks so you can tell us about the amazing work that you've been doing.
Thank you, Sarah. So again, I'm Robyn Hartwig, and I am very grateful to serve as associate pastor at St. Andrew Lutheran Church in Beaverton, Oregon. And I'm delighted we've got three folks here who have been hugely impactful already in their leadership of our community carbon project at St. Andrew. St. Andrew is the first pilot community for EcoFaith Recovery. When EcoFaith decided late spring or into summer to go ahead and launch a community carbon initiative under or following inspiration from Dick Harmon and Mark Ingman and conversations that the two of them had been having, EcoFaith was looking for a first pilot site to start to work with this, and St. Andrew has been that, not just been that pilot community, but really grabbed hold of this in a way that has far exceeded already my imagination, and St. Andrew's only been doing it since the end of June. I'm here just to introduce what the Community Carbon Initiative is, and then to let these other three, Allison, Carol, and Pat, talk to you about what St. Andrew is up to. I'm going to share my screen so that I can share a couple of things, places that you can go to learn more about it. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
So this is on the EcoFaith website, and as soon as I finish talking about these things, I'll chat these three different pages into the chat area of our Zoom meeting. So this is the Carbon Garden page on the EcoFaithRecovery.org website, and that is the a sign that Jenny Lee, our office administrator, made up as an example of something that folks can put in their yards if you decide, and if your faith community decides, that you want to try to take on doing a carbon garden. I'm not going to go into great detail about what it is because it's described here, and it will come up in conversation about what St. Andrew's doing under another name, soil garden. You can call it whatever you want. There's different name possibilities, but this is the invitation that St. Andrew is seeking to engage 25 or more communities of faith in ideally having their own carbon garden on their site if they have property to put it on, but more importantly, to engage members of your faith community in planting their own carbon gardens. And thanks to a number of folks from St. Andrew and from Cheryl Lorman's Create Plenty organization, we had a number of high schoolers and teachers and some retired folks who were mentoring the younger folks in how to do this at Janet's in My Yard just in October. So you can learn more about that there. We're really going to be talking today about the overarching community carbon initiative that EcoFaith has launched and that St. Andrew is the first pilot of. And that's also available on the EcoFaith website by clicking on under initiatives. Instead of clicking carbon garden, you simply click on community carbon, and then that takes you to that page, which has an overview of what this pilot opportunity is. And then if you're even more interested, you can see Mark Ingman presenting at the end of June at St. Andrew about some of the research and some of the inspiration that helped launch this process. And if you get even more interested in having your faith community involved, this orange button right here takes you to the document that has the goals and priorities of what it means to be a community carbon pilot community. And that opens up into this Google document right here. And as soon as it loads, here we go. It talks about the challenge and the opportunity and the vision for this initiative. And here on the second page are the 5 goals of being a EcoFaith pilot community in the Community Carbon Initiative. So one priority that we're engaged in is discovering the stories of the soil, the land, and its people. A second priority is deepening relationships within our immediate and broader communities as we do this. A third community is actually taking action together to restore balance with the soil, our communities, and our larger ecosystems. And there's many dimensions of what it looks like to restore balance. It's a little slow here, we go. And then the fourth priority is to reform our ritual life, our spiritual practices, and our community life in ways that more deeply reflect a spirituality of place. So to get our spirituality and theologies out of the clouds where they've been too focused for quite some time and back down into the earth community where they belong. And finally, to learn and grow by reflecting upon and evaluating the extent to which our efforts are achieving the goals of this initiative. You can read more about those priorities and then also the steps that you can engage in to become a pilot community if that appeals to you, and if you take it back to your community and you want discern that you want to and have the capacity to do this, here are the simple steps. And I'll say finally that St. Andrew is doing this as a faith community and is already engaged in reaching out to other individuals, other community organizations as we're doing that. But I think a really exciting way to do this would be to start with those partnerships already in place, if you have the capacity to do that. So if your community has the ability to partner with a school, wow, how exciting that would be. If your community has the ability to partner with another nonprofit, wow, how exciting. If your community had the capacity to partner with a faith community that was very different than you, say you're like St. Andrew and you have a lot of white middle class folks, but there was a frontline community in your area that wanted to do this with you. I think that would be super exciting. So just to give some seeds for the imagination to come, I wanted to throw that out there. But without any further ado, I want to turn it over first to Carol Harker, because she and the soil research team from St. Andrew have been really on fire with this initiative. Pat Christensen is also a part of that team. After Carol talks about some of the hands-on stuff that they've been leading our congregation and getting engaged with, we can go immediately from there to Allison Katsufrakis, who is St. Andrew's Minister of Music, to talk about already in just 3 short months how this initiative has been filtering into our worship and ritual life through Allison's leadership and the rest of the worship team, of which Pat is also a member. And then Pat can talk after that about how our St. Andrew Metropolitan Alliance for Common Good team is looking at engaging our congregation in a listening season, hearing our stories of soil and land, and any of them can talk about some of the justice dimensions that we're imagining. We've had conversations and imaginations about where the justice components of this lead. There's only so much you can do in 3 months, so a lot of this is just bubbling up and emerging. Without any further ado, I turn it over to Carol.
Robyn, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Then I'm going to start. I don't have my camera turned on. I'm co-chair of the Yard Survey team, and we are the scientific arm of the Community Carbon Project at St. Andrew. My co-chair and I decided right away that what we needed to do is to establish a baseline of how our yards are currently doing at sequestering carbon, because our objective obviously is to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We needed to find out where we are currently and what the potential is for future further sequestration and storage of carbon in our soils and plants. So for 9 weeks, we visited various yards in our suburban area. We did several things in those yards. We measured trees, we plotted out hardscape, and we also measured various areas of everybody's yard. So if somebody had a garden, we would measure that, because the soil in that particular spot was probably much different from the soil in a lawn area. And I have a document that I can share with everybody, but I'm not very good at doing that. So I'll give it to Robyn next week and she can share it. So we collected all of this data, and we immediately learned that it's very helpful to have people on the team with a scientific background, because they have connections and knowledge that give you a little bit of a head start. So we had both a forester and a geologist on our team, and we learned right off the bat that it's very easy to calculate how much carbon is stored in trees, because there's an international software program called iTree that does that for you. You have to measure a bunch of things and note the health of the tree and that kind of stuff, but then it will give you the number of pounds of carbon stored in the tree, plus the number of additional pounds you could expect to be sequestered every year, that is, pulled out of the atmosphere. So that was easy. However, we know that the biomass of the tree does not all exist above ground. There's a lot of it under the soil, and it's, after all, the soil that we're looking at. In fact, it's a partnership between plants and the soil that are able to sequester and store carbon. It's easy to figure out how much carbon is in trees. It's more difficult to figure out how much carbon is in soil, but we've collected dozens of soil samples at these various yards. We've taken them to a soil lab, and we have a range of percentages of carbon that exist in the yard. So what we've learned over time, though, is some of the scientific knowledge that's out there may not be accurate for our yards, because there are soil scientists who study agricultural fields, and that's where they take their measurements, whereas cityscapes are much different. There's a lot more compaction of the soil because of construction and that kind of thing. What we have done now is to stop making those weekly visits to yards. We are continuing to do research and analysis of the data that we've collected, and we're now at a phase where we are recommending to people in the congregation simple, cost-effective things that they can do to prepare their properties to sequester more carbon. So one thing I would recommend is, if you are interested in joining this project, is that you get yourself a copy of the book, The Soil Will Save Us, by Kristen Olson. That's O-H-L-S-O-N. And Kristen lives here in Portland now. She lived in Cleveland when she wrote the book. But that book has truly been an inspiration to us, because she has done what we cannot do, and that is go around the world and talk to farmers, homeowners, scientists, all kinds of people who are concerned about climate change and the climate crisis, and determined to find out if they can be better stewards of the land. So we are right now at the point, as I said, it's raining. It's a rainy season here in Oregon, so we're not out in yards, but we are making recommendations to people of what they can do. We visited Robyn's yard, Robyn and Janet's yard, on October 19th, and about 20 people, including high school students from her contacts on the other side of the river, did a lot of things that we're recommending. We ripped up 4 layers of landscape material because we saw in site after site that landscape material is a barrier that interrupts the mixture of humus with minerals that form soil. So we removed landscape cloth. We planted native shrubs and trees, which tend to do better, have deeper root systems, and get along with each other better. We planted some cover crop, although our team decided early on that cover crops are not likely to be a popular solution in our area, in part because of HOAs, which would not permit them perhaps, but also because most people might not be amenable to having taller grasses growing in their yard. What we planted in Robyn's yard was a miniature clover that shouldn't get more than 4 to 8 inches tall. So we also put down 8 yards of compost and mulch in her on her property. And mulch has been the great solution for us in this part of the world because it has so many benefits. It's readily available, it's cheap, it's easy to install, and it does so many good things in addition to feeding the microbes, because what we have learned is that we have for centuries starved the soil. That is, we've starved the living things that live in the soil, but they are critical. These microbiota, the earthworms, and other small creatures are critical in the process of decomposition that moves carbon into the soil. So plants, through photosynthesis, create sugars that they use to feed themselves. The excess sugars become, I'm not sure if I'll pronounce this correctly, but exudates that are released through their roots. And these things then feed the little tiny organisms that eat and poop and make larger and larger chains of carbon. So the CO2 becomes just C, and then that C gets connected to other carbons in longer and longer chains. And in doing that, it becomes fairly permanently stored in the soil. So I guess I'll take any questions now.
I think we're going to, after you all have presented, do breakout rooms. So if you have particular questions for Carol, you can request to be in Carol's room, and then you can continue this conversation then, so that we can just get all of the good information at once and then have those questions and conversation later.
Thank you.
I think we'll move to Allison and then to Pat.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is it possible for me to share my screen? Because I do have a couple of things I can show people as well. I see that I've got the green button. I just wanted to make sure.
Use it. If you've got the green button, you can use it.
All right, terrific. I'll pull that up in just a second. First and foremost, thanks a lot for having us. And it's exciting to talk about this. This is something that I hear a lot of people that are involved in worship planning and worship creation say that this is something they want to do, but they're a little bit nervous or hesitant to take the plunge, so to speak, because they're worried about the response in their congregations or their communities about when we try changing the traditional things, the things we've always done, there can be pushback. And I'm incredibly grateful to St. Andrew for their openness and their willingness to try a new thing. I have the advantage of having grown up in this congregation, and so they are sort of willing to kind of pat me on the head and go, okay, crazy little girl, you can try this stuff. We'll accommodate you. And then they sort of realize, oh, this actually makes sense. And so that's helpful. So it was a very, I have to say that it was an unusual thought process when I was first invited to be part of this project, because I kept thinking carbon and worship, and how do we connect these things together? And ultimately, environmental care and environmental justice is something that I'm already interested in. And it's always been kind of a part of my personal theology that this is something that we need to take care of as people of faith. But having to figure out how to start from that was a little bit of a challenge. And so the very first thing that I did was I started doing research, and that was not just looking into resources or things that you could possibly use for worship style, but also just reading theologically, like what are people talking about? What are people discussing, and how are we connecting our faith to the environment around us? So that was kind of my beginning. And then what I started thinking about was, I started to think about, and brought this also to, we have a worship planning committee. So we meet approximately twice a month to discuss the sort of the week-to-week planning of how all of these services go, but also just simply to talk about bigger picture kind of thematic material that we're discussing, or that we're going to focus on for a season or for a certain amount of time in worship. And so we have the advantage at St. Andrew of having Robyn on our pastoral staff. And so we're already a congregation that we try to give thought and concern to the environmental, the creation aspect of worship. But she was really terrific in helping us start to think about even things like talking about when we talk about the concept of heaven, and people often say, well, if you ask most people on the street, where is heaven? They point up. Well, what's up? I mean, first of all, it's not really up, it's out. And that leads to space. Now, is heaven in space? Or, well, and so it unleashes some really interesting sort of pre-scientific kind of just accepted ideas and concepts in the faith. And so you have to start thinking about, okay, so how do we reimagine that? And then that provides, then you start thinking about like breaking down parts of your service and thinking about when we say that, in the Apostles' Creed, for example, that Jesus ascended to heaven. Well, okay, what does that mean, ascended to heaven? And so you start thinking about these things and what do you want to do with that? But eventually you get to a point where you have to stop just having these discussions, and you have to implement that. You have to take that first step out in faith and try to do things. One of the first places I found to be very a safe place to start beginning to introduce these things was in song, and in hymns, and in musical presentations and musical offerings, looking at the anthems that I was selecting for the choir to sing, the hymns we were choosing, was a pretty safe place. I find that then prayers tend to be a pretty safe next step, prayers and litanies. It's when you start getting into the real time-honored traditions, things like I said earlier about the Apostles' Creed or the Lord's Prayer, or things that we've been using, elements of the worship service that we've had for centuries, that's when people start giving a little more pause to what you're trying to think about. But hymns and song are a great place to start in terms of rethinking your language and your ritual choices. So I will go ahead. I'm going to show a couple of things that I have. All right, so this is, all right, so what I'm showing here, let's see, I can show you, these are a variety of websites that I visit. So if you want to stick with familiar tunes that are also more earth considerate or earth-centered, carolynshymns.com, Carolyn Winfrey Gillette, she's a hymn writer. She has all over her website, she's got, these are texts that she's written. She has them on a whole variety of different topics, but she has a section that is all creation inspired or creation centered versions of texts that she's written. That a lot of them go with very familiar tunes. Let's just say, for example, Creator God, you made the earth. This goes to The King of Love, my shepherd is. That's a pretty familiar tune. That's a great place to start. It gives ideas for not just texts that speak about environmental justice and environmental care for the environment, but also speaks about justice as well, and justice for people and justice for creation being intertwined. So she's a great resource to start with. She also has written a couple of different articles about environmental green churches and things like that. She has a website about the Presbyterian Church where they built solar panels, where she's pastor. That's a helpful place to start. She's got a whole lot of really good information and ideas and resources. The other place that I have had really good luck with finding creation-centered music is Brett Hessla is a singer-songwriter out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And the primary document that's very helpful for me with his work is a songbook that he released with another singer-songwriter, Richard Brexford Colligan, that's called Singing Prayers for the Earth. It's an extremely cost-effective little book. It's I don't think it's even $30. And the nice thing is that you can not only order a physical copy of it, you can also order it online, so it's delivered digitally. That saves resources. You only print what you need. And also has each of the individual songs and elements that they have offered as individual downloads too. So again, extremely cost effective. You see what you're buying before you buy it. It's very helpful. The other thing that I will recommend, I recommend even if you decide you don't want to buy the book, I recommend that you visit the website, because as well, you can see that there's this other eco-justice resources. And a couple of things that you can find here are some poems, which are wonderful, some orders of worship, prayer service for solidarity with immigrants, and Earth Vespers, evening prayer service. These are two outlines for worship services that you might use as templates or as places to consider where you're moving forward. The other thing that I would recommend is down here on under articles, Singing with the Earth and the Global Church. This is you can download this article free from his website. And I would recommend that you download that if you're looking for some more resources and ideas about song and why, more arguments about why creation-centered worship is important and what it means. It's a great article. There's a lot to read and a lot to ponder, but the best part of it is this whole section down here, where to find earth-rooted hymnody. And he goes through the whole, a whole variety of different styles of music, and where you can find music that comes from a whole different variety of backgrounds. So you can find North American hymnody, you can find African American hymnody, you can find Asian, African, Latin American, South Pacific, a whole variety of suggestions that he offers are places to start thinking about these things. So that is a really, that's a really terrific article, really worth reading. I strongly recommend.
Allison, this is fabulous. And
okay.
Could we invite the folks who want to know even more about, you've just got a wealth of resources, and we've only been doing this initiative at St. Andrew for 3 months, which has been so amazing. Can the folks who want to talk more about that, can we invite them to go to a breakout group with you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I realize I probably
that's a particular interest of you. For you, Allison will be talking with you more. I'll just say that I've really appreciated Allison's leadership of looking for resources to help us get our theological imaginations out of the clouds and reform them so that they fit with the opportunities and the crisis that the earth community is in now, because the pre-modern way of thinking isn't, and some of the industrialized growth society ways that we've integrated some of those values into our faith isn't working for us. It's doing harm. And Allison is working really hard to think about how are we practicing reality when we gather for worship, and how does our faith speak to this time, and how does the language and the music, etc., need to shift and change in order to do that. And I was particularly inspired at All Saints Sunday that she raised the question to the other pastor and me about, gosh, shouldn't we have the other creatures, not just the human creatures, remembered during our All Saints liturgy? Never had that experience before myself, but thanks to Allison, our community had that experience where it was broadened out beyond the anthropocentric way of looking at who are the saints with among us now and in the past, and to come. So thank you for that, Allison. More to come in Allison's breakout group. And then if Pat, you could just give us a brief introduction to what the MACG team is up to, really starting in the new year, would be great. And then if folks may want to go to a breakout room with you to hear more about those things as well.
Okay, sure. You in EcoFaith Recovery, the group, are familiar with one-to-one conversations. That's a vehicle that is often used by organizing groups to deepen relationships between people and strengthen communities and to discover what's happening in the lives of the communities. What our team is going to be doing after the first of the year is trying to get to the stories of people and their land as part of our St. Andrew community building efforts. The form that we're looking at doing right now is to have an event probably after second service, because that's when we can get the most people to come, probably with food, because that always works. But invite particularly the people whose yards have been measured as part of this project to come and just share their stories. When did they come to this land? What have they done with it? What does it mean to them? And then invite the larger groups to also share their soil stories, their land stories. We'll probably do this in table groups rather than one-to-ones, because we have found that trying to schedule one-to-ones is a very long and kind of inefficient process. And so we're going to try it in larger table groups and see how that works. The idea behind that is actually in part based on a concept that Pastor Mark Brocker, our lead pastor, explored really deeply in his book, Coming Home to Earth. And that is that people will take care of anything that they care deeply about. And so when people care deeply about their land, they will take care of it. When people care deeply about the creatures in the land or the microorganisms or the whole earth system, they will take care of it. And so hearing each other's stories about how my ancestors came from Norway to Iowa as farmers. And so farming has been in my generational background for many generations, and how important the land is to everyone in my family and how that informed my feelings about things. And then moving out here to Oregon and becoming a suburbanite, but still wanting a connection with the land. I still need to have trees in my yard, and I still need to have open spaces for flowers and for other things. And so our attempt is going to be to try to bring the entire congregation into this effort through the telling of their stories. And that way, hopefully, deepen our connections with each other and also between individuals and their land. So that's it.
Thank you, Pat. We also are part of a Washington County immigration team with Metropolitan Alliance for Common Good. And so we're only 3 months in, but some of us have been talking about the connections between immigration and land, because, well, none of us, unless we're indigenous here, are from this land. So so what are the connections between our sanctuary team that we could do around people's immigration, land stories, etc., is one possibility. And in our context, it's largely Latinx folks who are working the land in Washington County. And so only 3 months in, we're still trying to get a handle on this, but with our MACG team and our sanctuary efforts, there's lots of possibilities in my mind for the intersection of these things that we're thinking about and learning about with the people in our communities, and that we have relationships now with through our sanctuary effort and through our MACG organizing effort, who are more directly working land, and how are people who are in the lawn care industry taught and believing that people want their lawns, and what does reform in that area look like, and what are their considerations and concerns, those who are working the land. So hearing their stories as well. So you can imagine there's lots and lots and lots of possibilities there. But sorry, Sarah, that went a little longer than what we were intending, but we'll pass it the stick back to you.
Great. Well, it's still, I think you're the person that has the power to break us off into breakout rooms. So I don't know what the best way to do this is. If you have a strong preference of which breakout room you're in, I guess let Robyn know and she'll start curating those spaces for us. So I would love to, just to jump in on that, I would love to talk to Pat a little bit more about the listening season with the soil and land stories.
I have some specific
as well. Oops.
Great. I have a couple of specific questions for Carol.
So let's say we've got a room with Pat, a room with Allison, and a room with Carol. So let me start with Pat. I've got Pat and Sarah in there right now. Anyone else want to join them? And that was Peter. Thank you, Peter. Mm-hmm. Okay. And Peter, anyone else? I can't see you all, so you might have to speak up. Okay. So that's...
Can you all hear me? I have a meeting to go to next, so I'm going to miss the breakout sessions, but enjoyed being part of this and really appreciate hearing from each of you, and especially the worship resources, and maybe a later conversation for those just interested in worship and music too would be great.
Awesome.
Yeah, maybe we'll do an all EcoFaith gathering specifically on that in the future. So I'm going to be reaching out to Allison about that.
My music director and choir organist person.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Let's plan on it. Thanks, Janet.
Thanks.
Wait, so I had Pat and Peter and Sarah, right? Okay, so now I'm moving to Allison, and who's with Allison?
I would love to be with Allison.
Great, and that's Nathan and Allison. Anyone else? Okay, you two are in there. And then, let's see, we've got Carol. And is that the room you want to be in, Margaret? Wait, where did I lose you?
At the Twelton Hills Nature Park. So I'm going to have to excuse myself. This has been very interesting, and I will share the information with the folks that led me to you in the first place. So thank you.
That's wonderful, Margaret. Thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted to have you with us. Great. So Carol and Solveig.
Yep,
okay.
Perfect.
And how long are we going to be in the room, Sarah? I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Yes, I am. Okay. I think we could regather at 8:10, so 15 minutes to have those conversations.
Great. All right. Enjoy your conversations.
Okay. Thanks, Robyn.
session, but we're on the phone, so we can keep talking.
All right, we're all coming back into the space.
And I think I actually will say goodbye and thank you, because I do have another meeting tonight, and I'm going to have a little dinner before I go. So thanks for inviting me. If you have any ideas, you can find Robyn, and she'll get them to me. And good luck as all of you discern what your place is in all of this. So
I'm actually gonna have to take my leave as well. I got the family in the other room. So
all right.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Allison,
Pat
for taking the time to be with us. Thank you.
Thank
Nathan,
you.
Sarah, can I ask a question of Nathan, or do we not have time?
Oh, yeah, we have time, because this next 5 minutes is just to bring anything that came up. So you would be beautiful.
Okay.
To ask.
I was sharing, and Peter, this might be helpful for you too. I was sharing with Peter that, St. Andrew's model is not the definitive model. It's the way this particular congregation in this particular context, with the things that excited them, went after this. And Nathan, I reached out to Nathan for a lot of reasons. And one of them was his own work, deep work, long work in anti-oppression, anti-racism work. And trying to think about how could you engage this initiative in a way that would integrate those kinds of values more deeply, because you can see with St. Andrew, we're kind of starting where we are and then trying to reach for justice from there with the avenues that we have. So what might it look like to have that just more integrated from the beginning? And Nathan, I don't know if you know, but Peter's community it has an English language worship service and a Spanish language worship service. So they have bicultural, maybe they're not like this, but they have two cultures, two languages going on. And I said, your way of doing that could have some real advantages that we don't have. So I was just wondering if you would share, Nathan, just where your imagination went with this before St. Andrew even really got involved. And in your perfect imagination, how would you be excited for your community to engage it, if it were possible to engage it in a more integrated way, and your community wanted to do that?
Yeah, thanks, Robyn. I'll just say a couple, maybe a few sentences about this. So I did actually initially reach out both to my own congregation and to Indigenous leader, a Lutheran leader actually in the area that is doing some pretty fantastic work in white communities and Indigenous communities, and sort of the crossover of those. And I realized after I went, so my shorthand answer is very slowly. the integrated communities, I think of Adrienne Murray Brown's talk about work at the pace of relationship. And so I realized after going to hear another Indigenous leader who talks about contextual lodge, so not combining Christianity with traditional Native ways, but bringing, talking about who is Jesus in the context of Indigenous communities. So like just placing him and Christianity in the context of an Indigenous community. So I learned a little bit about that. I went partly for relationship and got a chance to get to know Kevin better. And it may be that the people he's connected to may want to do something like this in the future. But I realized after asking my other Indigenous Lutheran friend, a colleague, that it was not time to put that forward. I didn't have the relationship. It may have been awkward, but I'm imagining that as a possibility. I also was just thinking about, I've had some slower relational experiences with a African-American leader in the area, but she lives about an hour and a half away on Madeline Island. She's got a farm. I'm going to bring it sounds like I'm going to bring a group of our youth to her farm next summer. She does some really amazing programming. She has an Indigenous friend on the same island who has a farm. It won't work out to have them involved this year, but I'm hoping it will be a little longer term thing. So to me, the next number of years will be engaging, getting to know folks better, talking about EcoFaith, and then looking for openings to say, could this be possible? I've mentioned it to Regina, who's the African-American leader, about this carbon idea. She's working with African American communities in Duluth, and recognizing that she knows how to work at their pace and what they want. So it's never a top down. Here's an idea. Would you do this? It's a what do you need? What's rising in you? How do I support that? And so, it really, in a lot of ways, takes some magic of, oh, it's the right moment. So I think for me, I guess it's the long way of saying it's slow. I can imagine a lot of really exciting possibilities. ECO, which is a Native organization in the area, could imagine them being excited about that. They're doing some pretty amazing stuff. And so that might be something to explore, but it's going to be a slow process, I think, years long to build those relationships.
I don't think that means necessarily that Peace Church couldn't start doing Karma Gardens on their own. And then with a much longer term culture change, regrounding in place, and knowing the stories of this place, and also our settler stories on this place, I think that it doesn't mean that we have to wait until we have those active partnerships before we can start doing this too, though. So just wanted to say that but all of these things are happening at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Go ahead, Nathan, you go.
Well, I was just also going to say, Anne, in addition to that relationship building, I'm doing a lot of active work to get clear about what's my relationship to whiteness, to white supremacy, and getting clear. As Sarah and I just had probably the most honest conversation I've had in Duluth around race with two African American coworkers, where they took off their usual politeness and got really real with us, and they're like, "You two are really white," and it wasn't like an insult, but it was, it was like, "Yes, we are." And it's taken a lot of time to build that trust, but they're also giving us mirrors, and both of us are going out, reading books, listening to podcasts to understand how do we fit in larger community contexts. What are the things that we need to know going in that I can't just do it the way I normally do if I'm in relationship to other folks. So I'm doing that work in my own communities, my own white communities, and doing it in relationship to have a mirror of oh, I see my whiteness right now, and the positives and negatives aspects of that. So that's another important aspect, I think, that can also be done in addition to the jump in and do the community carbon stuff.
Well, our group has gotten significantly smaller, but we are at a time when we would do our practice 6, which, Peter, how familiar are you with? I don't know how you fit into all of this EcoFaith Recovery stuff.
You're on our every Wednesday morning Metro Portland leaders call.
Okay, excellent.
So he's way grounded in the
My sense was that he was way grounded, but I didn't want to make any assumptions. So practice 6, what worked really well about this space tonight? What would be changed for next time? How are we thinking differently about our own calls to be courageous spiritual leaders in this time because of this space?
Well, I really liked hearing from the variety of sort of experience starting points from St. Andrews folks. That's really important because I sort of come at it one way, and I know when I bring this back to St. Michael's, I'm going to have people who come at it from these other ways, and I'm going to be able to say, yeah, that's the person you need to talk to. So that was really helpful.
I was really appreciative, Robyn, to get, I'm sure you've mentioned them to me before, but all of the exact places that the links on the amazing resources that you all have created around this. Grateful for that, grateful for the work that went into that.
Yeah, you bet. There's also EcoFaith has a Dropbox where I'm trying to videotape everything that happens at St. Andrew, the different presentations that happen when Kristen Olsen comes and does the Soil Will Save Us. And so when we get to the place where we've got folks who are really interested or really wanting to engage their communities, I'm just trying to document everything and have it in the Dropbox and get the leaders to put things in there, so that we've got actually a lot more stuff than that, but don't want to overwhelm on the website. But we have it available when there's a community that wants to access it and learn from it.
I'll share. I just valued both hearing a little more about the process at St. Andrews, but also it's keeping this community carbon idea on my radar. And one of the things I'm going to do as a result of tonight is currently doing a 2-part book study on active hope. I think maybe Solveig, you were the person that first introduced me to Joanna Macy and active hope. And there's a small but mighty group of 6 of us, and I'm gonna talk about this community carbon action as one of the 3 dimensions of the Great Turning: innovation, social and economic innovation, technological innovation, and you're doing it in a community forum. So I'm going to lift that up as an example this next Monday.
Beautiful. Well, I also really, I really valued having the 4 voices from St. Andrew. And then the opportunity to go into a breakout room with the person that we were most interested in talking with. That was great. That was so awesome. I loved it. So I know that that's not always possible because we don't always have a team, that's presenting, but wow, that really felt rich today.
Yeah, I feel like we could really hone that format. And just, I think time is always going to be our challenge, but if we could really prep people on what is your 4-minute depth of what you're doing, we could do that with our practicum cohort. We could do that with just different leaders. We could do that with former interns. It could be a really powerful way to share stories and have people dive deeper with the kind of work that's resonating with them. I also really like that. Thank you, Robyn.
Yeah. I think our team hasn't really presented before about our experience. And so having done that, I think I'd like to try to reflect around how else we would do that differently. We had emailed about time in advance, but we didn't really we didn't set up a process for ourselves for managing time. So that's a good learning and reminder. I think also in terms of audience, it's difficult in these gatherings because a number of folks had RSVP'd who didn't end up being here. Some folks didn't RSVP who did end up being here. So it's a little difficult to try to tailor what you're doing to the audience that's coming when you don't really know who's coming and what they need and et cetera. So that's challenge and opportunity with these Zoom gatherings, I think.
I think the solution to that is just yelling at people if they don't come, right?
I think that's what the practices would tell us to do, Nathan.
I think that's practice 8. We just need to put that in there.
Thanks, Nathan. You're the chair of the rewrite committee.
Yeah, I think that I am just holding continual questions about how we talk about this space and invite more people into it and use it really well. And so if any of you, Peter, of course, included, have ideas about what some future topics could be, or if there's amazing people from any of your communities that you're like, oh my gosh, we need some more ears on this person's wisdom. I got some sort of pushback this morning from the practicum cohort that they would really like to know several months in advance what was coming up. And I would also love that. So I'm just sort of actively collecting topics and people for this space. So keep that in mind.
Sarah, well, I can share this later too, but I wonder about I put together the adult forum for this fall at our church on climate justice. And I did sort of like a whole series of starting in the fall going to December. And I could, just share some of those topics that I think, especially ones that were like, ooh, lots of people came to this, both in terms of examples, but also could we do that format of like looking ahead 3 or 4 months and just finding speakers and setting it up? Maybe that's what you're saying, and I'm just saying it again.
We don't have the ability to pay folks, so they have to be like pretty committed to our community. So that's one reason that we've just been really drawing from who we have, because we don't have a budget for like Peace Church would to pay someone.
Either committed to the community or so committed to what they would be talking about that they would appreciate another audience or a wider audience for whatever it is they're passionate about.
All right. Anything else? Okay. Well then, our small and mighty group at the end, this is the time where we practice our virtual passing the hat. So we would normally, if we were all in space together, it's easier to pass a physical hat. But this way we say, I am pasting it into the chat box of the 7 easy steps to donate to EcoFaith Recovery. If you got something out of this meeting and would love to energetically exchange back, if you're feeling the need to ground in that Act 5, act together and pool our resources so that this amazing work can continue, there is your invitation for that. And then the invitation that goes along with that is to, if something really sparked in you during this conversation, if you would stick around afterwards, we could just make a short little video of you saying, I'm who I am, and I really enjoyed learning about St. Andrew's, and it has inspired me to think about similar things in my own community, for example. So those are our two ending invitations. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. Does someone have a Practice 7 restoration prayer song that's coming to them at this moment? It's a lot of topics covered, so there wasn't really I didn't have anything that came to me. Nathan.
I can offer us a song.
Thank you.
I don't know if I've shared this one. This is a Sarah Thompson song. Sarah is a local art musician. So if you're muted, you could sing along if it comes to you. Otherwise, I invite you just to listen and be surrounded by the prayer of a song. Oh, Spirit, guide us now. Oh, Spirit, guide us now. Oh, Spirit, guide us now. In your way, guide us. Oh, Spirit, guide us now. Oh, Spirit, guide us now. Oh, Spirit, guide us now. In your way, guide us. May Spirit continue to guide all of us in this work.
Amen. Thank you, Nathan.
Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah, so
Grateful
much
for
for your
this.
leadership. We are so blessed to have you leading us and convening these gatherings for us.
Thank you. I like to do it so much. I'm so glad to get the opportunity.
Such a gift. Such a gift. Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Bye, everybody.
Everybody have a good night.
Oh, okay.
Well, you want to keep talking?
Oh, we should probably stop the recording.
Oh.